Ahora nos toca tocar el tema del verbo tocar en este episodio de Spanish Dojo. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Spanish Dojo, where we're working to hone your Spanish speaking skills and make you sound more like a native speaker. Today's episode is going to deal with the verb tocar. Okay, there are lots of different ways that this verb can be used. We're going to talk about 6 ways today. I'm going to do them in 3 groups of 2. Okay, so the first 2 use the verb tocar in a sense that's more similar to English, where the translation would be to touch. The next group of 2 use this in a way that you really wouldn't use it in English, so they take on different meanings, something different from to touch. But the sentence structure should still be similar to English, even though the meaning and the translation would be different from what you're used to. And then the last group, I think, is going to be the most challenging one. That's where we're going to talk about a couple more uses of tocar, where not only is the meaning very different from what you might expect, but even the sentence structure is kind of flipped around from the way you might say something similar in English. Okay, so that's how we're going to break it down today. We'll start off with the easy ones. So the verb tocar literally means to touch. And the first 2 uses we're going to look at, that's pretty much how you could translate it. The second one will have an addition of an adverb, but the difference between the 2 is really just literal versus figurative. So tocar means to touch, and you can use it that way in Spanish literally. So say you have a phone in your hand and you wanted to say, that you're going to touch the screen. You could say, toco la pantalla, which would literally mean I touch the screen. Toco la pantalla. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. It's very similar to the way we would use it in English. Okay. The second use is more figurative. And I think in English, we would do this. We would add the adverb or preposition once you put an object behind it, on. Okay. So we might say to touch on. For example, vamos a tocar el tema de los impuestos. Okay. We're going to touch on the topic of taxes. Okay. So notice the way I constructed that one was I said, vamos a tocar el tema. So literally you're saying we're going to touch the topic. In English, that sounds just a little off. We would usually add the word on. We're going to touch on the topic of whatever. Okay. Or you might translate it as deal with or discuss, anything that has to do with, bringing up a topic and talking about it or dealing with its issues or whatever. So you can use tocar in that sense. In English, I think the closest thing would be to touch on. Okay, so that's the first group. I think that one's pretty straightforward. Just know that it would be translated as to touch, and you could use it literally or figuratively. Okay, moving on to the next group of 2. These are uses where the sentence structure is still going to be similar to English, but the meanings are nothing like what we would expect. Okay, so the first one is that tocar, if you're using it in the context of a musical instrument, it can mean to play. So to play a piano, to play a guitar, whatever. We use the verb to play. In Spanish, you would use tocar for that. So an example might be, mi hermano toca la guitarra. Mi hermano toca la guitarra. Okay, which would mean my brother plays the guitar. Now, literally, you might think of it as my brother touches the guitar, but that doesn't make any sense in English. So that's not the way we would say it. A good translation would be my brother plays the guitar. Okay. Don't use the verb jugar when you're talking about instruments. You may have learned jugar means to play, and it does, but not in the context of musical instruments. For that, you use tocar. The next usage in this group would be that you can use tocar also if you're talking about someone's house or their front door. Tocar can mean to knock. Okay, that would be the translation in English. So if I'm sitting at home and I think I hear something, I might say, ¿Alguien tocó la puerta? Right? ¿Alguien tocó la puerta? Did someone knock at the door? So literally, this is kind of like saying, did someone touch the door? but that's not really the message that's being communicated. In that sense, in the native-speaking Spanish speaker's mind, tocar would mean to knock on the door like that. Okay, so alguien tocó la puerta. Did someone knock on the door? Okay, so that's another use. So those two uses make up that second group. And as you can see, really the sentence structure is really similar to English. There's nothing weird going on. You just have to learn an extended use of tocar that doesn't literally mean to touch. Okay, it would be translated by other verbs in English. So that's that group. Now we get into probably the most complex group that we're going to talk about in this video. And that is that you can use tocar when you want to tell someone that it's his turn to do something, okay? Or if you want to say that it's your turn to do something, okay? In that sense, tocar has to do with it being your turn or being someone's turn, okay? Now, that's not so much what makes this one challenging. What really makes it challenging is that the syntax, the sentence structure is flipped around backwards from what you would expect in English. So in English, we might say something like, it's my turn, okay? And when we do that, we're setting up a subject, it. We have a verb, is, right? It is my turn. And then we have a possessive adjective, my, and then an object that's being possessed by that turn, right? It is my turn. Okay, that's how we set that up in English. In Spanish, of course, there's a way to do that literally in Spanish. You could say, es mi turno, and that works in Spanish just fine. It literally means it is my turn. So there is a literal translation. But we're talking about how to use the verb tocar here, and that is an extremely common verb that's used in this context, so you want to learn how to use it. Okay, so the way you would use tocar, though, is different. Instead of literally saying, it is my turn, what you do instead is you set the sentence up like this. You say, me toca. Or if you need to be emphatic about it or distinguish it from someone else's turn, you could even emphasize by saying me toca a mí if you want to. But it's not necessary. You can just say me toca. Okay, now this might look a little strange because you don't really see the verb to be, like, where does it say that it's my turn? This whole thing is flipped around. So here, the subject of the sentence is an unspoken it. Remember that when it is the subject of a sentence in Spanish, you just don't say anything, right? So the subject of the verb tocar here is it. That's why it's in the third person singular, toca. And I set myself up as the indirect object pronoun. Okay, so literally what this sentence is saying is, it touches me, which sounds kind of odd in English. I know that's not a very good translation, and you would never translate it like that. I'm just trying to communicate the literal meaning of what's going on here. Okay, so, but when you say a phrase like this in Spanish, when you say me toca, literally, it touches me, okay, what you're saying is, it's my turn. The closest thing I can think of in English, and this is still going to sound, it's not going to sound like something you'd hear every day, but the closest thing I can think of in English would be maybe something like, it falls to me, right? Sometimes in English, in more formal speech, if you're talking about a responsibility that you have or something, you might say that responsibility falls to you. In other words, it's something you have to do. It's, that kind of thing. So that's about the closest thing I can think of in English where it would be using the same sentence structure. And if you notice, it's the exact same setup. It falls to me, right? Where I end up being the object and there's this unspoken it or abstract it that's the subject. Okay. And that's kind of what you're doing when you say something is your turn in Spanish. So I might say me toca a mí, or just me toca. It's my turn. Or, a phrase like, todavía no te toca, right? Todavía no te toca. This would mean, it's not your turn yet. Okay, the todavía is yet. So, no te toca, it's not your turn. Okay, literally, it doesn't touch you. It hasn't fallen to you. Okay, it's not your turn. So that's a use of tocar as well. Now, extended from that, we move into our last usage of tocar. And this is related to what we just talked about, and the syntax works the exact same way as what we just talked about. But this, instead of communicating that it's just someone's turn to do something, this actually communicates even an obligation to do that thing. Not just that it's your turn, but that you're actually obligated or you have a duty to do it. It can be used in that sense as well. So let's look at a few examples for this one. Think about a sentence like, como llegaron tarde, les tocó pagar más. Como llegaron tarde, les tocó pagar más. Okay. Next sentence, me va a tocar repararlo. No lo puedo dejar así. Me va a tocar repararlo. No lo puedo dejar así. And then the last example, le tocó ir hasta el parque para recogerla. Le tocó ir hasta el parque para recogerla. Let's look at the translations to these sentences. For the first one, I would say in English, since they arrived late, they had to pay more. For the second one, I would say, I'm going to have to fix it. I can't leave it like that. And then for the last one, I would say, he had to go all the way to the park to pick her up. So notice that in all of these translations, what you're looking at is some sort of duty or obligation. They had to pay more. I'm going to have to fix it. He had to go all the way to the park. Okay, so it's that had to, it's that sense of duty or obligation. And that's the message, that's the concept that this usage of tocar is communicating in these senses. Okay, so in this sense, you can kind of think of tocar as a synonym for tener que. And you may be familiar with the phrase tener que, which means to have to, as in to have to do something when something is an obligation. So we could go back to our original sentences. You know, if we go back to como llegaron tarde, les tocó pagar más, me va a tocar repararlo, no lo puedo dejar así. And then the third one, le tocó ir hasta el parque para recogerla. Okay. And look at the structure here, right? In the first one, it's les tocó, right? It touched them, right? Or it fell to them, okay? As the example I used earlier. And then the next one, me va a tocar. It's going to touch me. It's going to fall to me. It's going to be my responsibility, okay? And then le tocó ir, right? It fell to him, right? It was his responsibility. He had to go. That's what he had to get done. That's what he had to do, okay? But in all cases, notice that the subject is always just this unspoken it. Whoever it is that actually has the obligation is set up as the indirect object pronoun. Les in the first example, me in the second example, and le in the third example. Okay. The subject is always what it is that has to be done, and the person who has that obligation is the indirect object. Okay. Now, we can take all of these sentences, and since this use of tocar is basically a synonym of tener que, we can actually replace all of those with tener que, and it will mean the same thing. You won't change the meaning at all. So let's take the first one, and instead of saying como llegaron tarde, les tocó pagar más, let's say como llegaron tarde, tuvieron que pagar más. Como llegaron tarde, tuvieron que pagar más. Next sentence, instead of me va a tocar repararlo as the first part, let's say voy a tener que repararlo. And then the rest of the sentence. Voy a tener que repararlo. And then the last one, le tocó ir hasta el parque para recogerla. Let's take that first part and change it to tuvo que ir hasta el parque para recogerla. Tuvo que ir. Okay, so now we've said the same thing just in a different way. And notice that when you use tener que, you no longer use this weird construction where it's flipped around. Now we've set it up to where each person is the subject of the sentence. So if I say, tuvieron que pagar tarde, tuvieron que pagar más, now they're the subject. They're the ones who had to do it. So tener que works the way you would expect it to work, just like in English, where the person who has the obligation is the subject and you conjugate the verb for that person. But when you use tocar, you have to flip it around and make that person the indirect object. So those are the 6 ways to use tocar that I wanted to address in this video. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try to help out as much as I can. As always, hit the like button if this was useful to you. Subscribe for more content just like this, and if you're watching this video after 2019, be sure to check the description for a link to my book. That's it for this episode. I'll see you next time. Thanks.